Hello, and welcome back to another video. Do you have an algae problem? I did too. Would you believe me if I told you about 2 weeks ago this entire carpet was flowing with hair algae? And I'm talking flowing, it was really bad. I would never let it get that bad. I let it get bad on purpose so I could make this video. Once I realized what was causing it, when there was a lot less kind of over here, it was too late, so I just kind of let it grow so I could make an informative video of what I did to get rid of it, that's real hands-on, and what caused it, so you can prevent this from happening to you. Let me show you what I did to get rid of it, and you'll see how bad it really was. Alright, so you can see how bad this is. I would never let my tank get like this. I hope nobody else does. It's funny how that one little patch right there didn't have any algae, and I think that's because that's where the CO2 diffuser was. But look at this S-repens, and no algae on it, but it's just gorgeous. That started as like 1 or 2 tiny stems, and it's just taken off. Same with that AR Mini, it's just gorgeous. I thought I was gonna die when I first planted it, and nope, it's huge. But you can see down here where the soil is, there's a good probably inch and a half of algae and hair grass and glossostigma. And I'm gonna cut it down as low as I can. And by cutting it out, I'm just gonna grab these wave scissors and I'm just gonna start chopping away, guys. Don't be scared to do this. Your grass will grow back, your glossostigma definitely will grow back. That stuff just doesn't stop growing. It's growing on rocks, little trimmings I've cut off will land on a rock and start growing. Look just how bad that really is. I mean, I knew it was bad by the way it was growing and flowing in the water, but it was so thick, I had to do like 3 different takes because I didn't want to cut too low at first. So I chopped it all down to a safe height. Then I, went a little deeper, saw how it looked, went a little deeper. I just kept on cutting this disgusting stuff away. So this is where it's at after trimming this section. I'm actually amazed how bright green that grass is underneath because it was definitely getting light blocked from it. So it just amazed me how it looked underneath, kind of gave me some hope that it was still healthy. So I did use a net to get as much out as possible. I didn't let it just float around and land everywhere. And then right here you can see I'm trying to siphon some of it out, doing the trick where you pinch the hose off, suck up some of the muck, pinch off the hose so rocks or anything falls out. And then I just kept siphoning away at it. Every square inch of the tank got that. And then after this, where I don't have footage, is where I use the toothbrush and also is scooping it into the siphon. And then filling the tank back up, my little homemade, pump here. I've tried the Python, well, an off-brand, and I just didn't like it, so I made I just got a big bucket, holds 18 gallons, condition the water, I have a pump in there, and yeah, that's how I do my water changes. I siphon it out into a 5-gallon bucket. By that time, my bigger tub is already full of conditioned water. Use my homemade little method there with a pump to fill it back up. As you can see at this time, there was still a lot more algae than there is now. From this where you're seeing, I did not touch it. I just did no fertilizer and fixed the CO2 issue. I think a lot of it died, and then the fish and the shrimp kind of took care of the rest. This is what it looked like the day of. This is immediately after, I got done filling it. You could notice my filters on the other side of the tank, which I'll explain why I kind of feel like that was a part of the problem also. See the diffuser there, those bubbles are too big. A lot of it's just going up, it's not getting good circulation. I kind of talk about that in a minute. So you guys saw how bad that was and what I did to get rid of it. Took a real hands-on approach. I didn't want to use any chemicals. There was way too much to try peroxide. I do have a bunch of mono shrimp in here. Well, there's 8, and they couldn't even keep up with it. But after doing that cutting, that was 2 weeks ago, I stopped using fertilizer for an entire week, and I lowered the light down to, I lowered the brightness and I went down to 6 hours instead of 8 for the past 2 weeks. Actually, last night I just put it back up to 8 hours, and I ramped it up just 1 notch. This is the Twinstar 600 EA version 4, so it has the dimmer. It's still not, right now this is about 60% brightness. I'm pretty sure the camera makes it look brighter than it is. In person, it doesn't look nearly as bright as what you guys see. Let me give you some close-up shots so you can just see how much better it really does look. There's still some algae down in there in the glossostigma, but that smaller amount, the mono shrimp are taking care of it. And believe it or not, the guppies, these little beautiful girls right there, and these guys, the Galaxy Rasbora or the Celestial Pearl Dania, whichever you like to call it. I'm not really sure why there's two different names, but they actually eat it a lot, and these guys are just so fun to watch. They will bury themselves down in the grass, wiggle around, and then pop out. They're all over the place, and the plants in the back. But you saw how bad it was over here. This was the worst spot. And now it's pretty clean. There's not much in there. All I did was cut it out like you saw, and then I actually used a toothbrush and started kind of brushing, like raking it out of there as I was siphoning to get more of it out. And that was pretty much it, besides what I had to adjust. So I know exactly what caused this problem, and it was completely my fault. If any of you have seen the video, that time-lapse maintenance video I've done, I trimmed the stem plants in the back a lot. Like, I removed probably 60% of the stems. Now my fertilizer I'm doing the EI method, and the problem that I did was I'm dosing 20 milligrams a day. I'm sorry, 20 milliliters a day. I actually got that right here. Every other day of the macros, and then every other day micros. So 6 days a week it's getting fertilizer, alternating macros, micros. Ultimately it's getting 60 milliliters of macros and 60 milliliters of micros a week, which was fine. Now, after I did that major trim, the next day I just went along with my fertilizer regimen, and that was the problem. I was adding way too much fertilizer, so the plants weren't able to consume it. For one, they're in shock from just all being cut in half, so they weren't consuming any fertilizer. I continued adding the same amount, so that just made just a feast for the algae to start growing. And it started over here just as a little bit. I tried to siphon out and get it, but I wasn't thinking about what I was doing wrong. I wasn't thinking about how I was dosing way too much fertilizer. By time I realized that's what it was, that my light was too bright, too much fertilizer, because the plants weren't consuming that much, which is kind of the tricky part of the EI method, at least for me. I'll be honest, I'm pretty new to this, and I just love it. I love learning about it, and I figured out a problem that hopefully other beginners will learn from my mistakes. If you're dosing any type of fertilizer, and you trim your plants, especially as heavily as I did, either don't fertilize at all for a few days, or drastically reduce the amount of fertilizer. It's way better to have too little to be lean than too rich to have too much. If you have too much fertilizer, your plants aren't going to consume it all, and that's just a breeding ground for all types of algae. Along with the light, if you're doing too much fertilizer and the light's too bright, you're going to get algae. I also have a lot of fish in here, which is a pretty big bioload for this tank. This is a 20-gallon long. Now I do have what I believe is over-filtered. It's a Biomaster 250 on a 20-gallon tank. Plus I do weekly water changes, 50%. The other issue that I'm pretty sure I had, which I'll show a clip of it right here. Let me move this. My filter intake and outtake used to be on the other side. So I moved it since this video started. I had the intake and outflow on this side, and I was looking at some old clips where my grass was beautiful. It was still growing in, it wasn't full yet. And I was just kind of thinking about things, thinking, since I moved the filter to the other side, there's a lot more open over here. The outflow coming this way, there's a lot more obstruction. It changes the whole flow dynamic of the tank. So over here, it's real open from front to back. And then I have, my little island or whatever you want to call it. So if they're going this way, it's able to hit this, come through, get all the stem plants in the back, and then back to the intake of the filter. When I had it on the other side, like I said, it would just come over here, and it was kind of just coming right back down in the front. So basically all the fertilizer in the water column was coming and just flowing right here in the front, which, as you saw, that's where the algae was the worst. Another issue I did, so there's three things, maybe I should have started with that, was too much fertilizer. My light was probably a tad too bright. I'm expecting it was more of the fertilizer and the CO2. I made a video where I installed an inline CO2 diffuser. This tank with the regular style in-tank diffuser, it was hard to get a good CO2 to dissolve in the tank because this tank is so shallow and long. So with the diffuser way over here, my outflow over here, a lot of the bubbles were just coming up, popping, evaporating. I had the bubble count way too high, and it still wasn't enough CO2 in the tank. Since I've switched to the inline diffuser, I've been able to reduce my bubble count. A lot more of the CO2 is getting dissolved in the water, and I know that that is also helping with the algae. So too much fertilizer, not enough CO2, and too much light. I was basically asking for algae. It's just one of those things. So I hope this was informative. I hope you learned something. I hope I showed how bad this was and how much better it looks now. I mean, the tank looks beautiful. Like I said, there's still a small amount. Get that out of here. There's still a small amount of algae in the carpet, but these guppies, those CPDs, the Amano shrimp, they're really taking care of it, because even my Christmas moss looks better. There's still a slight amount of hair algae on there, but this is how it's looking, and it's all going well. It's beautiful. As always, if you made it this far, thanks for sticking around. Thanks for watching. I hope you can learn from my mistakes. Don't keep adding a whole bunch of fertilizer right after a major trim. If you're injecting CO2 in a high-tech tank, make sure you have the proper amount of CO2. If the plant's not getting the right CO2, they're not going to be growing as quick, not going to be taking in as much nutrients. If the light's too high, you're going to be creating algae. It's just learn from my mistakes. Lower your light after a trim, stop or reduce the fertilizer, and make sure you have enough CO2. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you in the next one.